Hello, my name is Benji and welcome to Dice vs Cards. Today we visit once again with Arkham Horror, the card game. Last week we brought you the Guardian Toolkit, aka every worthwhile Guardian card you could ever want to include in your deck. But today we're going to talk about the Guardians themselves. We won't necessarily be ranking them, but we'll certainly be giving a rating for both solo and multiplayer. More importantly, we give you the lowdown of each of the first three Guardians: Roland Banks, Zoey Samaras and Mark Harrigan, and what makes them a special little snowflake. Good old Roland Banks, the federal agent and corset investigator that was destined to be part of the first player experience. And you can see why. The game's all about gathering clues and slaying monsters. Everything else is secondary, apart from staying alive and not going mad, of course. But Roland can ably kill things and get clues whilst he's doing it. When we look at his stat line, you see someone that can hold their own against a variety of skill tests, barring those of the agility kind. But Roland is a shoot first, run later type of guy, and that coupled with the most likely consequence of a failed agility test being some incoming damage, Roland's health pool of 9 helps in that regard. With his native combat of 4 being the platform you want your Guardian to work from, needing only one more combat to get to the sweet spot of 5, and an average willpower, meaning he won't be too heavily ganked by the encounter deck, but bear in mind you do have to be wary of his low sanity. And finally, with an average intellect of 3, you can work with this to clue gather on your own, as we'll touch on later. His signature ability, as I'm sure you can already gather, is a teensy bit good. A free clue when you defeat an enemy is action economy and get me to the win condition personified. So although Roland is fantastic as a solo investigator, he can also do a job in multiplayer, where he'll see more enemies. In his Elder Sign ability, while situational, isn't comparatively bad by any means. Roland's signature card, 38 Special, is everything you want a 3-cost, limited use weapon to be, and synergises well with his overall game plan of finding an enemy where there's a clue. 4 ammo is also very nice at this price point. His weakness cover up is a bit of a pain, but it does scale with shroud value, which means you can prop yourself up in the right place and deal with it. This obviously gets trickier if you draw it near the end of a scenario, but the same can be said of a lot of them. As weaknesses go, I can certainly live with this one, but just know you cannot afford one mental trauma over a campaign, so make sure you do deal with it. His off-class deck building choice of Seeker cards is what tips Roland over the edge for solo play. Having access to cards like Art Student, Working a Hunch and Shortcut allow you to get clues and soak horror, get clues faster and move faster, making up for one of Roland's main issues, mobility. When all's said and done, there's a lot to like about him. He's self-sustainable so long as you look after his sanity, meaning he's going to be a wonderful investigator for you in solo. Gaining an A if you're at the table alone, because he can do everything the game wants you to do to get through a scenario without the aid of others. Multiplayer is a bit more of a mixed bag, where I'll give him a B. On the one hand, like I've already mentioned, he likes to see loads of enemies, but on the other hand, he doesn't make a great chaperone because of his doubling up with the clue gathering ability. Although, like most Guardians with 9 health, he can still do good things tanking in multiplayer. Next up is Zoey Samaras, released with the Dunnage Legacy cycle. A self-appointed agent of the Almighty, and whilst her day job is that of a chef, her night times are filled with the deliverance of retribution. Very much an investigator with one thing on her mind, dealing with both the physical obstacles that get in her way and the mental ones that get drawn from the encounter deck. Her stat line says one thing: you deal with clue gathering and I'll deal with the rest. Having a native combat of 4 means you're just 1 away from where you want to be when fighting, and 4 willpower means that you'll be passing a lot of skill tests, but even when you don't, the consequence will often be negligible. The low intellect is what it is. Even with support in this area, clue gathering isn't going to be something you're great at. And the last thing on Zoe's mind is evading, so her low agility of 2 isn't too much of a hindrance, and similarly with Roland, her 9 health should be enough to tank any separate agility tests. Her signature ability is what makes her so hungry for blood. It also affords her the means to be a bit more flush with her cash when deck building. This incremental resource generation, especially for Guardians, should not be underestimated, and really contributes to making her a highly capable killing machine, synergising nicely with the higher enemy counts of multiplayer games. Her elder sign is solid and brings up an interesting discussion about how much she needs plus damage. Speaking of which, her signature card Zoey's Cross gives her something quite deliciously flexible to use when engaging enemies. In concert with her ability, you have the option to use the resource you generated to immediately ping the enemy for 1. So for 1 health minion, that's a no-brainer in terms of action economy. But say for example you don't have a weapon or one with plus damage equipped. It gives you all the choice you could desire on how to proceed, and opens up all sorts of possibilities when it comes to deck building with weapons. You certainly can't afford to dispense with plus damage ones, because what happens if you don't draw it? But it definitely gives you options in terms of increasing the resource curve of your deck. Her weakness can obviously be quite painful, but when assessing weaknesses, one that doesn't bring a hard counter to your strengths should be considered comparatively harmless. Just make sure you've still got enough fuel in the tank in case it gets drawn late. Her off-class deck building, where she can take 5 level 0 cards from anywhere, gives her 1 chance to be flexible in her approach. It still won't make up for her clue gathering shortcomings, but it will allow you to deck build to perfectly complement other investigators taking part in a game. Having access to a larger pool means that every subsequent set release she gets incrementally stronger. And because she's an enemy hunter, you'll probably want to support her with cards like Shortcut, Quick Thinking and Leo DeLuca, who give you a way to get things quicker, further action economy, and the ability to do 4, not 3 things in a turn. For the brave of you, you can choose to complement a group of all-rounders with cards like Drawn to the Flame, Lucky and Working a Hunch, in order to bring some clue gathering to the table, but remember this will always fulfill a secondary role. When summarising Zoe, it can be comforting when an investigator makes it quite overtly clear what he or she wants to be doing with their spare time. In terms of solo play, she'll struggle a little, although with her off-class choices being so flexible, it's not half as dire as you might think, but still not enough to give more than a C for solo play. In multiplayer though is where she excels, comfortably deserving an A. Not only can she deal so well with enemies and the encounter deck, she's modular enough in her deck building to shore up weaknesses you may have elsewhere in your party. Finally for today's video is our grizzled war veteran Mark Harrigan. Hailing from the messed up depths of the Path to Carcosa, this guy is an expert killing machine, but one with his fair share of inner demons to contend with. Seeing far too much horror abroad, he returned home to a similar scene as his beloved Sophie was consumed from the inside out. What this means is you'll be playing with fire throughout a game, but the carnage you can reap if things go well is a sight to behold. As far as his stat line goes, well, we've walked straight into bear territory here. The first and still only Guardian to have a combined total of 13 skill, so even a slightly unnecessary high agility of 3 doesn't detract from this being a strong base investigator. The native combat of 5 is what makes this guy so potent, enabling him to focus on plus damage over plus combat, which allows for some economical deck building choices, and his average willpower creaks under the pressure a bit like it does with Roland, considering his low starting sanity. And the less said about intellect the better. Does this look like a clue gatherer to you? Mark's signature ability screams tempo and card advantage, and lightly cajoles you to bring some allies and equipment to the party to soak some damage to proc that card draw. Alongside Sophie, you really want to be taking as little direct damage as possible to enable him to use her special when needed. Trust me when I say you don't want to be seeing her flip side too much, as that stat line advantage gets gimped into the ground. If you're not doing a great job at keeping Mark clean, then you've still got an uber powerful elder sign to complement it once in a blue moon. His signature card at the home front is extremely powerful, but as it's a skill, it's not one you're desperately digging for, which turns out to be quite liberating. It's one that when you draw it gives you more or less a guaranteed fight victory, with a cherry on top of managing their incoming damage. His weakness on the other hand, Shell Shock, is another reason to keep Mark healed up wherever possible. If you let too much stack on him, then it's good night Vienna in most situations. It can easily be a game ender as soon as it's drawn. His off-class deck building choices are interesting in that they're not class specific but trait specific, meaning that you can take any level 0 tactic cards across the length and breadth of the game. Notable considerations for these places would be shortcut, practice makes perfect, and followed. For some added mobility, the ability to search for a useful skill, and a reasonable way to do what Mark does and snatch a couple of clues at the same time. Overall then, he does what Mark does. The joy in him is playing to his strengths, but walking the tightrope of taking too much damage and or going insane. As such, he can be a somewhat risky proposition in solo, but if you build some damage mitigation in to allow you to use Sophie that little bit more, he can still do some work, warranting a B for walking the path alone. As you can probably gather though, this guy is a beast in multiplayer, especially if someone is taking care of the clue gathering and can heal him. It's an easy A for Mark when venturing out with 2 to 4 investigators. So there you have it, your choice of the first 3 Guardians released. Now there's no excuse not to get creative and take your favourite Guardian for a spin. Stay tuned next week for part 2, but for now I hope you found this helpful and I'll see you next time.